The administration manufactures a crisis, and then they swoop in, say they saved the day, and ask you for praise. This is what they consistently do. And my friend Angry Male Vet really turned me on to this idea. It's something I had kind of been tracking on and off all year, but his analogy for it, and I'll link him below, really brought it home. See, Scott Bessent and Donald Trump both announced that they had secured a deal for soybean farmers in the United States, that between now and the end of the year, China was going to buy 12 million metric tons of soybeans. And then next year and every year through 2028, they would buy 25 million metric tons of soybeans from U.S. farmers. But the problem with that is U.S. farmers last year and the year before, and almost every year under President Biden, sold at least 27 million metric tons of soybeans to China. So the deal that Donald Trump is touting is worse than what they had already been doing. And it's a crisis that Donald Trump's administration caused because Donald Trump didn't get his way when it came to China. They manufactured a crisis. Then they claimed that China was holding U.S. farmers hostage and using them as political pawns, when that is exactly what the Trump administration was doing to these farmers that voted for him. And now they've saved the day. They consistently are doing this, and I kind of expect them to swoop in and do it with SNAP tomorrow on the 31st, or maybe first thing Saturday morning. But I'm not holding my breath, because that's one of those Democrat programs, according to Donald Trump, that he doesn't like.
Well, after yesterday's meeting, Trump says that China will buy 12 million tons of American soybeans this season, 25 million every year after that. I think it's a 3-year deal or something. And the MAGA crowd cheers. But here's the truth. He's celebrating a crisis that he caused. Back in 2016, before the trade war, China bought 41 million tons of U.S. soybeans. Then Trump started the trade war to teach China a lesson. China retaliated, and overnight the market collapsed. By 2018, exports dropped to 9 million tons, and thousands of small farmers across the Midwest went bankrupt. People lost their lands, their saving, their generation legacy, all for political stunt. And years later, he came back and says, look, China is buying soybean again. But this is a third what they used to buy. It's not a win. It's a bone. It's a pity deal. Beijing did not surrender. They basically diversified their market. They're now buying from Brazil, Argentina, and soon Africa. This is not American first. This is America begging for what it used to have. The saddest part, the same politicians who caused this disaster are using farmers as a prop in their campaign ads. They destroy your livelihood, then they sell you the illusion of a recovery. They think you won't notice the numbers. They think you are too loyal to ask the questions. The truth is here. The soybean victory is just a return to less than normal. 12 million tons used to be a bad year. Now it's a headline. I have more contents like this on Substack, link in bio, and or visit grumpychinesguy.com. Thank you guys. Take care.
Well, that's interesting. Well, MAGA, it seems like a lot of you are going to be foolishly going without farms next month. Maybe you use too much of your money on cheap processed farms. I mean, have you ever thought about getting a job? Oh, so your farm was your job? Well, maybe you should get another job. Or, maybe just get another farm, right? I mean, it seems really like you should pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? I mean, let's be honest. What did you do with last month's farm?
Breaking news. Miami-Dade County is about to FAFO about SNAP benefits, about Medicaid, and about Affordable Care Act subsidies. What? Yes. Miami-Dade has the highest number of seniors on SNAP benefits of any city in the country. What? Yes, the highest percentage of SNAP benefits. Actually, 25% of the entire county of 2.8 million people are on SNAP benefits. Likewise, when we go to look at Obamacare plans and the Obamacare subsidies, Miami-Dade County, again, has had more applications, in particular in the cities of Hialeah and Doral, of almost any part of the country again. And guess what? SNAP benefits are going to end November 1st, unless they're funded under the contingency fund. If there's any of that fund left, I think they already spent it. And they're going to see the Affordable Care Act subsidies go away and the insurance cost increase substantially so that many can no longer afford it. And guess what? Miami-Dade County voted 55% for Trump and 45% for Kamala Harris. They voted against their SNAP benefits, and they voted against their the Affordable Care Act subsidies, Obamacare subsidies, when they put Trump and the Republicans in. Now they're going to lose it, and they are screaming down here about it. So FAFO. Likewise, by the way, I'm in Fort Lauderdale, just to the north, Broward County, 58% for Kamala, 42% for Trump. Quite different here. But Miami-Dade, you lay down with dogs, you get up with fleas. You voted for the man. They cut your benefits. They cut your subsidies for your health insurance. You all voted for him. Now you get to enjoy your vote. Love to hear from my Democrats, my MAGAs, my crazies, my cuckoos, my burned out light bulbs, my fellow Floridians, and any of my Cubans and Venezuelans that did not vote for Trump. Love to hear from you too. All of y'all that voted for him, I don't want to hear a peep out of you. You voted for the man. Watch out, slip of the tongue there. What do y'all think?
Donald Trump is losing the trade war against China, which he himself started. Trump held an important meeting with China's president, Xi Jinping, in South Korea on the 30th of October, and they came to a new agreement which essentially amounted to a one-year truce in the U.S. trade war. Now, in a few minutes here, I will look at the exact details of this agreement, and I will further discuss issues like Trump's tariffs on China and China's export restrictions on rare earths. I will also look at the trade between U.S. and China, especially agricultural trade and China's exports of advanced technologies. And I will look at how China has been catching up in some cutting-edge high-tech sectors, especially semiconductors. But the main takeaway from all of this is that although this is not the end of the trade war, it's only a one-year truce, Donald Trump has clearly lost this battle in the trade war. China has won this battle. As the Financial Times put it, China is emerging as a U.S. peer rival at the Xi Jinping-Donald Trump summit. The FT noted that when Trump first started the trade war on China back in his first term as U.S. president, it actually surprised Beijing. However, the FT noted, quote, "This time, a better prepared and economically more powerful China has been able to fight its once far mightier opponent to a standstill," end quote. And this is why an analyst at the major European bank BNP Paribas wrote the following: "The United States is accepting that, quote, it is now dealing with a peer rival capable of imposing material economic harm on it, a relatively new position for the U.S., and a development which, at least to us, confirms China's ascendancy to global economic superpower status," end quote. That is the money quote today. China is officially an economic superpower, and the U.S. empire cannot bully around Beijing and try to force it to do what it wants, like the U.S. has done with its so-called allies in Europe and South Korea and other countries. China was not willing to be bullied by the U.S. Now let's discuss what exactly was agreed to in this Xi-Trump meeting in South Korea. Here is the so-called scorecard that was kept by Bloomberg. So 1, the U.S. agreed to lower its fentanyl-related tariffs from 20% to 10%. The U.S. is also suspending the 50% expansion of its U.S. entity list, which is basically a form of sanctions targeting Chinese companies. Trump is backing away from the 100% tariff threat on China, and the U.S. is suspending ship fees. Those were the U.S. concessions. On the other side, China is giving up its rare earth controls, and China is going to resume buying American soybeans, Although China was already buying those soybeans before, so this is not really a new concession made by China. And maybe China will agree to buy energy from the US. That's what Trump floated, but there's not actually an agreement on that yet. That's a hypothetical. And then finally, China agreed to crack down on the export of chemicals that are used to make fentanyl, although China already had some restrictions on that. And maybe there will be some kind of agreement on TikTok, but again, this is not clear. It's completely ambiguous. So in reality, China is not making very many concessions, which is why, as Bloomberg put it, China is giving up less than what the US gave up. Bloomberg concludes that China won this round of the trade war. This was also the conclusion of the Associated Press. As the AP put it, the deal between the US and China is undoing the damage of a self-inflicted trade war. Now, this is quite funny because if we go back to April, when Trump massively escalated the trade war on China, Trump's Treasury Secretary, the billionaire hedge fund manager Scott Bessent, claimed that the US had all the cards and China was playing with a, quote, losing hand, end quote. He claimed that the U.S. had so much leverage over China and that Beijing would completely surrender amid Trump's threats. That's clearly the exact opposite of what has happened since then. And this is not 2000. 20 years ago, 25 years ago, China was very dependent on trade with the United States. But in the past 2 decades, China has significantly reduced its dependence on trade with the U.S. and export to the U.S. market. Now, many people in the Trump administration, like Bessent and Trump himself, think that the economy of China today is like the economy of China in the 80s and 90s, when China was making very low value-added, labor-intensive goods of low quality. China has massively boosted its technological capabilities, and today China is the world's manufacturing superpower, leading in the vast majority of industries. This is why the Financial Times published a report in which it concluded that China exports a lot of advanced tech to the US that the US cannot source from anywhere else. So what we've seen over the past 2 decades is that the Chinese government has used industrial policy, state-led development policies, and planning, central planning, in order to move up the global value chain and increase its technological self-sufficiency so it's no longer as dependent on the U.S. So in the past 20 years, China has become less reliant on exporting to the U.S. market, while at the same time, U.S. industry has become much more reliant on importing inputs, industrial inputs from China, which are needed for the advanced manufacturing in the U.S.
The Senate has just voted to end Donald Trump's tariffs. This just happened today, and I'm shocked. So here's what happened. 4 Republicans actually crossed the aisle to join a Democrat effort to curb Donald Trump's tariffs. Those 4 are Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, Rand Paul, and Mitch McConnell. Which one of those are you the most surprised to hear? This vote just occurred today, Thursday, October 30th. Now, this resolution, it was brought forward by Ron Wyden of Oregon, and it was able to pass with just a simple majority. This measure would end Trump's ability to impose tariffs without congressional approval. But it could end up being nothing more than symbolic. In order to become law, it would have to pass a vote in the House of Representatives, where it's unlikely that Mike Johnson would even bring this to the floor. Nevertheless, I'm glad somebody is standing up to him and doing something about it.
Do you remember when Donald Trump told American families to cut back on buying kids' dolls? Well, now he's making candy more expensive too, just in time for Halloween.
We spoke to one candy shop in North Carolina that said that these high tariffs have really hit everything. It's not just the imported cocoa, it's also the aluminum that goes into some of the packaging.
Candy prices this year are up 11%. That's nearly 4 times as much as inflation overall. Pack of Tootsie Rolls up 30%. Packs of Kit Kats, Twizzlers, and Heath Bars up 22%.
That's more than 5 times the price increases last Halloween.
And the scariest part of all, those congressional Republicans, you know, the ones in the majority in Congress, they aren't doing a thing about it.
In Wisconsin, soybean season is underway, but farmers are missing their biggest buyer, and it's tied to the president's tariffs. News 8 Now's Allison Fergit has a closer look.
China used to be the biggest buyer of U.S. soybeans, but they stopped buying from the country in the early spring. That's forcing Wisconsin soybean farmers to have to sell their product at a loss. It's harvest time at Galesville's Scotch Prairie Farm, and farmer Ken Condon is spending his days in the soybean field.
It's a very good crop.
For years, China has been soybean farmers' most reliable customer, but they stopped buying U.S. soybeans in response to President Trump's tariffs.
It has really had a detrimental effect upon the American soybean farmer and Wisconsin farmers in particular.
Condon says soybean farmers worked for years to build that market with China, and to see it go away so quickly is disappointing.
As a farmer, it's kind of a slap in the face because you worked really hard to develop these markets.
While there's other markets they can sell to, Condon says it's at a lower price.
I looked at my cost of production from last year. That was $12.45 a bushel. Markets are now about $9.45 a bushel. So there's a $3 difference.
And that adds up fast.
We're producing about 16,000 bushels. So that's $48,000.
The Trump administration is planning to offer soybean farmers aid to make up for the losses.
We're looking at anywhere north of $10 billion worth of aid going out to our soybean farmers to help close the gap.
But farmers say it's not a long-term solution.
Farmers don't want checks. Farmers want markets. We want to sell our product to people that will use it and pay for it.
While China boycotts the U.S., they've established stronger partnerships with soybean growers in South America. Farmers say they need to find markets to replace China's demand soon, or else farms could start to close.
If you have 2 bad years, you may be out of business. At my age, that's probably not the big deal, but yeah, I sympathize for the young guys that's trying to make it right now.
Now, Senator Path and other Wisconsin legislators have actually sent a letter to the Trump administration asking them to do more to help Wisconsin soybean farmers. Reporting in Galesville, Allison Fergit, News 8 Now.
We love a great FAFO moment, and I have another one for you. First, some background. 65% of the state of Alabama voted for Donald Trump. Alabama is in the top 10 poorest states in the United States related to federal poverty level. While many of these voters sit behind their computers and celebrate Elon Musk cutting waste, little did they know it was going to impact them. This week, over 250 residents in Huntsville, Alabama received a notice from their electric company that they were going to have to pay an additional $100 surcharge. The explanation for this was that Donald Trump's recent executive order ended a $1 million grant to the utilities company to help these customers pay for their electric bill. Leaders in Alabama are furious because they said this is counterintuitive to Donald Trump's promise to lower energy costs. Tots and pears.
Hey, Trump supporters. So the time where you could claim that you had no idea what was going to happen has come and passed. I mean, by years at this point. I can't even begin to say how many small businesses, how many farmers, ranchers I've seen in the past few weeks coming on here. And yes, there's no other word for it, having sob stories, being like, we're struggling so hard, we're going to have to close, we're in debt, I don't know what to do. Yes, I voted for Donald Trump, but I didn't know this would happen. Yes, you did. Do not lie to me. Lie to yourself, don't lie to me. You knew exactly what was going to happen. Donald Trump is many things, but he's not a good liar. He told you, he told us, he told everybody very clearly what his plans were, what he was going to do, what he wanted to do. You just made the mistake of figuring that it wasn't going to apply to you. You figured that the horrible things that he was going to put in place would only negatively affect other people, would only mean that your neighbors went hungry, not you and your family. And yes, for a lot of these white people, you specifically thought it would only happen to people who didn't look like you. But hate at the level that Donald Trump holds doesn't discriminate. So stop lying. You knew it was going to happen. You just didn't think it applied to you.
On today's episode of Before and After, here's how it started. Jay Minthuin on Twitter wrote, "I am for one happy there will be consequences for the arrogant Canadian fools. I hope the Canadian economy collapses," misspelled by the way, "when Canada comes crawling asking to be the 51st state." Then he wrote, "We voted for common sense and the future of the country." And here's the after. In response to a post that the President of the United States wrote, he said, "In 9 months, we've lifted over 600,000 Americans off of food stamps. Wages for workers are rising at the fastest pace in more than 60 years. And meanwhile, energy prices are down, gasoline prices are down, grocery prices are down, mortgage rates are down." And Jay wrote, as of October 29th, 2025, "I was just laid off as part of a RIF. I work in HVAC controls. The economy is sick right now, worse than 2009. I voted for Trump, but he needs to listen to the boots on the ground on the economy, not former Soros lackeys." Well, Jay, you voted for this, now you have to live with it. Because a lot of us foresaw this coming, well, you did not see it, like 1930s Germany. But what did y'all have for dinner tonight? Let me know in the comments. Bye.
I'm going to be donating my TikTok proceeds that I make for the foreseeable future to the Pittsburgh Food Bank, because like families all over the United States of America, Pittsburgh families will be losing their SNAP benefits and people will go hungry. So if you want to stick around and listen to this story and help families eat this month. So when I was about 4.5 years old and my sister was 2 and we have an older brother, we were playing hide and go seek. My mom was a nurse and she was getting ready for her 3 to 11 shift. I don't know what my dad was doing. He was somewhere downstairs. And while my mom was getting ready upstairs, we were up there playing. We're playing hide and go seek. My sister and I were supposed to go hide and my brother was going to find us. So I picked her up and we decided to hide in my parents' bedroom closet. Picked up my baby sister. I put her in the closet. I came in and I went to pull the door shut, not knowing that her little pinky finger was in the hinge of the door and it cut it off from about that line up. So we rushed her to the hospital, of course. Me being the big sister that I am, I actually ran away and let my mom find her screaming baby. We all go to the hospital. My grandfather actually went to our house to try to find the little piece of the finger, put it on ice, hoping they could reattach it, but they weren't able to. While we were at the hospital, I kept asking them, you know, will her finger go back? Will her finger go back? And the doctor explained to me that no, it wouldn't. But my mom, being the nurse that she was, took really good care of it. And the shape of it healed very nicely. And it's not anything that would even like draw your attention. Anyways, that was in like the 90s. So of course we didn't have the medical technology that we do have now. Nowadays, if old men are pewed on a stage in the ear, they have like this medication now, I guess, that grows your ear back in a matter of days. It's crazy, right?
Soybean farmers, you are about to be treated like a fool by the Republican Party and Fox News and some of the mouthpieces. You're about to get flooded with all this information about how Trump just struck this massive deal for 25 million metric tons a year for 3 years with China of soybeans, right? Trump saved you. The Republican Party just saved you, right? Saved your farm. You were getting 27 million metric tons. You were selling 27 million metric tons last year under Biden. He made a deal for less. And that doesn't even take into account the 6 months from May to October where there was nothing. You were getting paid nothing. The American Soybean Association estimates that soybean farmers lost an estimated $10 billion in those 6 months. $10 billion. 6 months of worry and fear and how am I going to make payments and what is going on by soybean farmers. And now Trump and the Republican Party are going to swoop in and say, like, look, we just saved you. They're the motherfuckers who took it away in the first place with this tariff war. They're the ones who made your life shitty and made you live in fear. Now they're going to give it back to you and expect you to cheer them and be like, thank you so much. I can't believe you saved us. They're the fuckers who did it to you, right? It's like a fucking robber coming up to you and stealing $27 and giving you 25 back and saying, are you going to thank me? Like, what the actual fuck? So watch this. Watch. It's going to be all over Fox. They're going to say, like, look at this historic deal. Incredible for farmers. I can't believe what he did for farmers. It's less than what you were getting. And you lost $10 billion in the process. Just think it through. They fucked you over. $10 billion. And now they're giving you less than what you were getting. I would not be happy.
Happy Halloween, everybody. It is Friday, October 31st. In this video, I'm going to talk about Donald Trump's tariffs. Next week, the U.S. Supreme Court is going to hear a consolidation of 2 cases in order to determine whether or not Donald Trump is exceeding his authority as President of the United States in imposing the 2 types of tariffs that he has imposed. So we are going to talk about the appellate court decision that consolidated these 2 cases and is forming the basis for what is going to happen next week in the U.S. Supreme Court. So there were 2 cases that were brought. In one case, 5 businesses sued over Donald Trump's tariffs. The lower court found that Donald Trump's tariffs were illegal, unconstitutional, and that he had overstepped his authority as President of the United States within certain statutory schemes. Also, that the power of the purse, taxing and things like that, belongs to the Congress, not to the President. In the second case that was consolidated, there were 12 states that sued, also in order to stop the Liberation Day tariffs, the reciprocal tariffs that Donald Trump put into place on April 2nd. The defendants in the consolidated cases are Donald Trump, Office of the President, Kristi Noem, Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Patrol, etc. So these cases come out of the Court of International Trade because these cases, these tariffs involve items that are imported into the United States from outside of the United States that are manufactured in other countries. That makes this case international trade, and there is a specific federal court for that. It's called the Court of International Trade. The United States Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit heard these consolidated appeals in what's called en banc. That's spelled E-N-B-A-N-C, which means that instead of just a panel of 3 judges, all 11 of the judges who sit on the United States Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit heard oral argument in this case and participated in drafting this opinion, a concurrence, and a dissent. There are 11 judges on this Federal Circuit. 7 judges formed the majority opinion. 4 of those 7 wrote an additional, not really a concurrence because they're part of the majority opinion, but they said, we think this decision should go further in the following ways and for the following reasons. 4 of the judges dissented. And so let's dive in. And so these tariffs came about under a statute called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, the IEEPA. Since coming into office, Donald Trump has declared a lot of emergencies. He has done that so that he can theoretically avail himself of additional powers that are not available to the president absent an emergency. In most of these circumstances, there is a statute or statutes involved that if a president declares an emergency and if other certain requirements are met, then the president can then exercise powers that he or she normally would not have. So I'm looking at page 5 of the appellate circuit decision, reading from this. This case involves the extent of the president's authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to regulate importing things in response to a national emergency that was declared by the president. Since taking office, Donald Trump has declared several national emergencies. In response to these declared emergencies, the president has departed from the established tariff schedules and imposed varying tariffs of unlimited duration on imports of nearly all goods from nearly every country with which the United States conducts trades. At issue in this case are 5 executive orders. And so on January 20th, Donald Trump declared the existence of a national emergency at the United States southern border with Mexico. He instituted some executive orders related to the importation of fentanyl and things that go into making fentanyl and illegal drugs that are killing Americans. So the court has labeled those, and then Donald Trump put tariffs on Canada, China, and Mexico as a result of that executive order and declaring that emergency. So he put tariffs on Canada, Mexico, China, started out at 10%, and then he changed them constantly. There was no dependability or reliability or predictability to his tariff whims, but the appellate court refers to those as the trafficking tariffs. And then there's another category that we're going to talk about called the reciprocal tariffs. So he puts the tariffs on Canada, China, and Mexico, and he did so, again, reading from the decision, in imposing these tariffs, he claimed to be acting under authority of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, and, quote, specifically found that action under other authority to impose tariffs was inadequate to address this unusual and extraordinary threat. So he's relying specifically on this one specific statute, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. So that's one set of tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China. Those are the trafficking tariffs. Then on April 2nd, you guys remember Liberation Day? When he had his little chart with all the tariffs on it and all the math was wrong, and it turned out that somebody had just plugged a bad formula into ChatGPT and it spit out all these numbers that Donald Trump was relying upon in imposing tariffs on literally every single other country on the planet, including one which is just an island inhabited by penguins. Yeah, he did that. So on April 2nd, 2025, the president imposed what this opinion refers to as the reciprocal tariffs, baseline 10% tariffs on imports from nearly every country with which the United States has any significant trade relationship, with additional tariffs ranging from 11% up to 50%. And then, of course, he started shuffling all of those around and taking them up and taking them down and pausing them and unpausing them. And he was just a lunatic with these things. And he said that this was, so the emergency that he declared relative to the reciprocal tariffs is, he said, there exist trade deficits. If there are trade deficits, that's a national economic emergency, and that grants me power under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to just do these tariffs however I want to. It's important to note that tariffs are specifically delegated to Congress in the Constitution. Yeah, and they remain that way unless Congress passes a law that delegates those powers to the office of the president. And even in that case, it's open to court interpretation, yada, yada, yada. So in imposing the reciprocal tariffs, Trump again invoked his claimed authority under the IEEPA and explained that the reciprocal tariffs addressed an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security of the United States posed by underlying conditions, including lack of reciprocity in our bilateral trade relationships, and on and on and on. And so he puts these 10% tariffs on every country on the planet at a minimum. Then he increased the tariffs on China to 34%, then to 84%. Then I think he went up to 125%. All of that was still within the month of April. And then there were discussions. He brought them back down to 10%. Then in July, he paused the enforcement of these tariffs until August 1st. Then on July 31st, he paused them till August 7th. But then on August 7th, the tariffs went into effect. Then we have these lawsuits that were filed in May. On May 28th, a 3-judge panel of the Court of International Trade granted summary judgment to the 5 business plaintiffs that we're going to talk about, saying that this is illegal. Donald Trump can't do this. He's not comporting with the language of the statute, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The court said that he was reading things into the statute that are not there, and thereby claiming powers that he does not normally have based on language in a statute that doesn't exist. So overall, let's pause here for a second. The lower court decision and this appellate court decision are not complicated. They're basically saying the president did X, Y, and Z under claim of authority under this particular statute. Go to the language of that statute. The language of the statute does not provide for Donald Trump to be able to do what he has been doing with the trafficking tariffs or with the reciprocal tariffs. And that's what the argument is about. What language is in that statute, and the language that's in there, what does that language mean? Because Donald Trump is relying on certain language in this statute to say, well, that's the same thing as tariffs. If the president gets to do this, that means the same thing as tariffs. So I get to do tariffs all over the place like a crazy person who is off his meds. So we get these lower court decisions. The Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit decides to consolidate these 2 cases, the one with the business plaintiffs and the one with the states as plaintiffs. And the court decided on its own motion to hear the case en banc, meaning the entire panel of all 11 judges on this federal court. And they heard oral arguments in the case and then gave us this decision here, which I think came out on August 29th. and thereafter the Trump administration immediately appealed it to the Supreme Court on an emergency appeal, and that's the appeal that is going to be heard sometime next week. I don't know exactly what day it's going to be heard. But starting on page 12 to page 25, the court goes through a lot of very dense history of tariffs and tariff law and different acts, different laws in the history of the United States. It's really dense, it's really boring, it's important, but given that it's dense and it's boring, I'm going to skip it. If you want to read it, feel free. I read it and found it to be dense and boring, even though it was informative, but I'm going to skip it here. So then we get to page 26, the legal analysis section of this court opinion. And the court lays out what they're doing, but also what they're not doing in this opinion. We are not addressing whether the president's actions, all of his tariffs, should have been taken as a matter of policy, whether or not they were good decisions. Nor are we deciding whether the International Emergency Economic Powers Act authorizes any tariffs at all. Rather, the only issue we resolve on appeal is whether the trafficking tariffs and the reciprocal tariffs imposed by these 5 executive orders are authorized by the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. We conclude they are not. So the appellate court found against Donald Trump. That's why he did the emergency appeal. So let's pause here for another second. Donald, I think it's been reported that these tariffs have brought in somewhere between $200 and $300 billion since April 2nd. If the Supreme Court agrees with the 2 lower courts and says, no, Donald Trump is not allowed to do these tariffs, the United States government is going to have to pay back all of that money to all of the people and all of the businesses who paid tariffs since April. If the entire tariff scheme is illegal and unconstitutional, the government will not get to keep the money that they brought in under that tariff scheme. They're going to have to return all of that money. Another side note, the Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, I got that wrong, Howard Lutnick, is a huge proponent of these tariffs. He was formerly CEO of an investment firm in Manhattan named Cantor Fitzgerald. When he got this position, he turned over all of his business interests to his 2 adult sons. Sound familiar? Yeah. His 2 adult sons started a new business, selling tariff insurance to corporations. If a company had to spend $10 million on tariffs, Howard Lutnick's adult sons would go to that company and say, we will give you $2.5 million for the right to collect on that money if these tariffs are overturned by the court. And which these companies don't know whether these tariffs are going to be overturned. So they just spent $10 million that they never expected to see again. And here come these 2 chuds saying, we'll give you $2.5 million for those tariffs, for the right to collect on those tariffs. $2.5 million is better than nothing. If the court orders these tariffs to be reimbursed to the people who paid them, Howard Lutnick's sons will get $10 million that they paid $2.5 million for. So further commercializing and just profiting off of the executive branch by all kinds of people in this administration. Getting back to the decision, the analysis part. So the court goes through an analysis of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, and they're discussing this statute and its language and its intent and its history, and the history in place from when it was written, from the congressional record. Notably, when drafting the IEEPA, Congress did not use the term tariff. That word does not appear anywhere in the statute, or any of its synonyms like duties or tax or taxes. None of those words appear in the very statute that the Trump administration is relying upon to say Donald Trump can do whatever he wants on tariffs. Tariffs, which are explicitly reserved as a power of the Congress in the Constitution. So the court starts out strong by saying The language you're relying on does not appear in this decision at all. In contrast, they talk about some other statutes. The use of the broad term, quote, regulate, without also separately and explicitly granting the president the authority to impose tariffs. The language of the statute also does not grant that power to Donald Trump. It does not grant him the power to impose tariffs. It does not contain the word tariffs or duty or duties or tax or taxes. None of those words appear in the statute. There is no language in the statute that says we delegate to the President of the United States the ability or the power to impose tariffs during an economic emergency that he declares. None of that is in here. And they go through some examples. It's a pretty interesting opinion if you guys want to go look it up. And they go through a discussion about the language that is in the statute, like regulate importation, regulate importation. And they go through an analysis that says the administration is relying on that language, regulating imports. And the court goes through an exhaustive analysis to get to the determination to say that does not include tariffs at all. It doesn't. It has nothing to do with tariffs. So 0 for 2. The statute neither mentions tariffs or any of its synonyms, nor has procedural safeguards that contain clear limits on the president's power to impose tariffs. Taken together, these and other statutes indicate that whenever Congress intends to delegate to the president the authority to impose tariffs, it does so explicitly. It uses the actual language, either by using unequivocal terms like tariff or duties, or via an overall structure which makes clear that Congress is referring to tariffs. This is no surprise, as the core congressional power to impose taxes, such as tariffs, is vested exclusively in the legislative branch per the Constitution. That's Congress. When Congress delegates this power in the first instance, it does so clearly and unambiguously. It did not do so in this statute, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. Contrary to Trump's assertion, the mere authorization to regulate imports does not in and of itself imply the authority to impose tariffs. It's not in there. The power to regulate has long been understood to be distinct from the power to tax or impose tariffs. In fact, the Constitution vests these authorities, tariffs and taxation, in Congress separately. While Congress may use its taxing power in a manner that has a regulatory effect, the power to tax is not always incident to the power to regulate. They don't always go hand in hand. Let's see here. Upon declaring an emergency under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, a president may, in relevant part, here's the language from the statute, investigate, block during the pendency of an investigation, regulate, direct and compel, nullify, void, prevent, or prohibit the importation or exportation of any property in which any foreign country or national thereof has an interest. Regulate must be read in the context of these verbs, none of which involve monetary actions or suggest the power to tax or impose tariffs. The government's interpretation of this statute as providing the president power to impose unlimited tariffs also runs afoul of what's called the major questions doctrine. I'm going to skip that. The statute in question, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, was drafted into law about 50 years ago. Since then, past presidents have invoked this statute frequently, but not once has a president asserted his authority under the IEEPA to impose tariffs on imports or adjust the tariff rates thereon. For example, in the aftermath of the September 11th, 2001 terror attacks, President George W. Bush invoked the IEEPA to establish a process for designating terrorist organizations and affiliated individuals to prevent the deployment of American resources for their advantage. Under the statutes that came before the IEEPA, a president has invoked his authority to impose tariffs on only one occasion. And on that occasion, the tariffs were of very limited scope and for a very limited period of time. Donald Trump's tariffs have none of that. There are no limitations on scope. There are no limitations on time. There are no limitations on amounts. There are no limitations on how often he can change his mind and change these numbers and durations. And some of that becomes kind of important. But the executive's use of tariffs qualifies as a decision of vast economic and political significance. So the government, Trump, must, quote, point to clear congressional authorization for its interpretation of the IEEPA. For the reasons discussed above, we discern no clear congressional authorization by the IEEPA for tariffs or of the magnitude of the reciprocal tariffs and the trafficking tariffs. Reading the phrase regulate importation, to include imposing these tariffs is, quote, wafer thin on which to rest such sweeping power, quoting another case. We are unpersuaded by Trump's argument that it is particularly inappropriate to construe narrowly a delegation of power in the arena of foreign affairs and national security. While the president, of course, has independent constitutional authority in these spheres, the power of the purse belongs to Congress. Tariffs fall under the power of the purse. Absent a valid delegation by Congress, the president has no authority to impose taxes or tariffs. Given these considerations, we conclude Congress, in enacting the IEEPA, did not give the president wide-ranging authority to impose tariffs of the nature of the trafficking tariffs or the reciprocal tariffs simply by using the term regulate importation. That was not Congress's intent. So the government wants, the government's argument is that that terminology in the statute, regulate importation, regulating imports, implicitly includes tariffs and imposing tariffs and changing them all over the place like a lunatic that Donald Trump has been doing since April. They're like, no, that's what that language means. And the court is saying that's absolutely not what that language means. And they rely on some case law that came about before the IEEPA was written and saying, well, that case law existed. And so when Congress wrote the IEEPA, they were ratifying some of these former cases that have since changed. And so in conclusion, they write, even if we accept the government's argument as correct, we still must conclude that the challenged executive orders in this case exceed the authority provided by that interpretation of the IEEPA. Both the trafficking tariffs and reciprocal tariffs are unbounded in scope, amount, and duration. There's no limits. There's no framework. The government is arguing that Trump is allowed to do anything he wants to do. These tariffs apply to nearly all articles imported into the United States, and in the case of the reciprocal tariffs, apply to almost every country on the planet. They impose high rates, which are ever-changing and exceed those already in place and are not limited in duration. The trafficking and reciprocal tariffs assert an expansive authority that is beyond the express limitations of the authority delegated to the president in the statute, the IEEPA, that he is relying upon. And so concluding, the appellate court affirmed the lower court decision from the Court of International Trade. We affirm that the Court of International Trade is referred to as the CIT. We affirm the CIT's holding that the trafficking and reciprocal tariffs imposed by the challenged executive orders exceed the authority delegated to the president by the IEEPA's text. We also affirm the CIT's grant of declaratory relief that these executive orders are invalid as being contrary to law. All of Trump's executive orders on tariffs have been deemed illegal. And that is the question that is going to be before this current United States Supreme Court when they hear oral arguments next week. I gotta say, at this point, I have much more confidence that this current United States Supreme Court will completely ignore the law that is laid out in that appellate decision and the lower court decision, and will instead choose to do as they have done so many other times this year and simply say, Trump can do whatever he wants. It's fine. There's nothing to see here. This is totally fine. It doesn't matter. And on and on and on and on and on. This court has utterly beclowned itself at the throne of Donald Trump. They have changed the nature of the institution, the Supreme Court, and made that historical body, judicial body, a bootlicking supplicant of a Republican president. They did not show similar deference during Joe Biden's term. They did not show similar deference to Joe Biden at all. They are Trump bootlickers, all 6 of the conservatives on this current Supreme Court. All right, so that's your primer for oral argument next week when this Supreme Court takes up Donald Trump's trafficking tariffs against Canada, China, and Mexico, and the reciprocal Liberation Day tariffs that Donald Trump imposed on literally every single planet or every single country on the planet. So if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments, and I will try to get to those and provide you guys with additional information. Anyway, it's like a little after 1 p.m. On Halloween, Friday, October 31st. Have fun this weekend. Please be safe this weekend. See you guys soon.
American workers and American taxpayers have been taken advantage of for multi-generation, for decades. And it's time for somebody to stand up and put us first and put the country first and do what's best for the country, not what's best for the politicians.
Even if you as a farmer suffer.
That's right.
I mean, some people would hear that and be quite surprised that you're prepared to put your livelihood, your family's livelihood, on the line for the sake of politics.
Well, that's my duty as for being the head of my household. I've got to do what I got to do, what's going to be better for the future, better for the kids. It's not about today, it's about the long term. The long game is where the rewards are going to be.
But don't the price of tariffs and what happens in commodity markets like soybean, doesn't that affect you in the short term and affect your ability to provide for your family?
Look, tariffs will probably have a detrimental effect on soybean price in the near future. In the long term, it'll probably work out. I'm a farmer. I deal with bad weather. I deal with dry weather. I deal with torrential rains. We deal with hurricanes. What's a tariff going to do? You know, I got to raise a crop. If I was worried, I'd stay home and not raise a crop. If I was worried about it, I still got to get out there and raise my crop to get the price. If you don't get the yield, it doesn't make any difference. You know, I got to deal with all these other things. What's a tariff? I can't control that, so it is what it is.
I actually agree with a lot of what he said there, even though he's a little misconstrued. All the stuff he said at the beginning, I agreed with. But then he said, but when it comes to tariffs, I can't control that. Well, you could if you voted differently. And you said that you have to worry about weather and floods and this and that, but you have crop insurance for that. You don't have tariff insurance. And it might be bad in the short term, but it'll probably work out. You're working on probability, just probably? Is that how farming works now? It'll probably be okay. I don't know farmers that deal like that. I really don't. And I've worked with tons of farmers over the years. I know a lot about farming. I know a lot about farmers. Most are generally good people, even if they vote like shit. They vote against their own interests constantly because they believe the lies that they're told. They believe the nonsense that the Republicans told them and tell them. It's amazing considering that the Democratic Party, also known as the DFL, the Democrat Farm Labor Party, was started basically by farmers. And they've all strayed away from it because of feelings and hatred. That's it. That's what they voted for. Feelings and hatred. And your soybeans, yeah, it might not be good for now, but it might be okay probably in the future. Well, you think those soybean markets are going to come back to you? It sounds like you're kind of waiting for a handout. It sounds like you're waiting for your handout. because you've gotten accustomed to it. You've been accustomed to the Hands Across America to support the farmers constantly. Farm aid and this aid and that aid for the farmers and bailouts and helping them from this and that. They're used to the money. They're used to having their hand out now as they complain about people with their hand out. Yeah. They're going to pay for this, and it's going to cost them dearly. And why would China just suddenly decide to come back unless it's so good? The deal that Donnie gives is so good that it just totally crushes the farmers. But he doesn't care because he's not going to be around, and he knows it.
For all you coffee drinkers, you can thank Donald Trump and the Trump administration Republicans for tariffs. Coffee is going up 19%. Coffee beans, too. So your favorite drink, cup of Joe's or Dunkin' Donuts, Starbucks, it'll be 19% more. And it's going to rise again next year. Thank the Trump administration. Tariffs. So if you like coffee, even when you go to the grocery store, you will be paying more for coffee. How you like the Trump administration now? How you like Republicans? How do you like those tariffs? A whole lot of people drink coffee. Them coffee beans just went sky high. So not only does it go up in October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May of 2026, it does as well. You're welcome. Enjoy that cup of Joe because it's going to cost you 19 to 20% more. And I don't know about you, but I'm tired of these prices going up. Thank God I don't drink coffee, but if you do, get ready to pay more money to have that cup of Joe.
Well, we've got a lot of fucked up shit going on in this country. We've got a shutdown, SNAP maybe going away, healthcare prices going through the roof. We've got an imminent war in Venezuela. The tariffs are causing prices to go sky high. A lot of things going on. So what do you imagine the president is doing today? Apparently, the president is back into renovations of the White House. We know he tore down the East Wing and is putting up this ridiculous monstrosity of a ballroom. But he hasn't stopped there. He's doing something else. With all this shit going on, this is what he posted. I'm going to read it. I renovated the Lincoln bathroom in the White House. It was renovated in the 1940s in an Art Deco green tile style, which was totally inappropriate for the Lincoln era. I did it in black and white polished statuary marble. This was very appropriate for the time of Abraham Lincoln, and in fact could be the marble that was originally there. Our president is doing design projects in the White House. And I have a theory here. He knows his time is short as president of the United States. He's going to have to pick up another gig in the future. The whole apprentice thing has gone by the wayside. He can't do that again. Apparently, Donald Trump is auditioning for a future show, a reality show on HGTV. Flippin' Donald Trump. That would be a fucking great show. And the sooner you can go take that job and get the fuck out of the current job you're in, we would love it.
Well, here we are. It's Friday, and we are just literally minutes away from the border to Canada as we flee the U.S. Who would have thought at age 60 that this would be our day and our plan and our actions? And I know fleeing sounds dramatic and like something from a movie, but it's really true. We just feel so scrutinized and so silenced and so being portrayed as enemies within and being portrayed as domestic terrorists because we're standing up for what we believe in this country and what we believe is being violated and is going into an authoritarian regime, and is in it actually, and has been since he hit the ground running in January, the day he was inaugurated. It's really frightening, and it's really unsettling, and there's just no peace in that. The folks that follow him and voted for him are just being barraged with this indoctrination by this cult of personality to believe through just repeated messaging that Democrats are the enemy within, his words, that all Democrats across the board are domestic terrorists, again, his words, that this straw man that they're building with Antifa to give them something to be outraged about, that they feel they need to take up some sort of vigilantism to seek out and seek retribution on their own. It's just whipping up this frenzy of hatred, just like 80 years ago in Germany in the 40s, when the authoritarian regime there and their leader were messaging out the same things about how races within their country were the enemy within, were animals, were rats that needed to be exterminated. Just like this guy said a few weeks ago that Democrats were just a bug on our shoulder that just needs to be squashed and swatted away. There's so many parallels in history that are being seen all over again. And who would have thought here in the 21st century, years, hundreds of years after a civil war, after fighting for freedom in the 1940s and the 1950s to keep authoritarian regimes like this out of our country and off of our soil, that somebody would rise up from within our country with no political experience and whip up this frenzy of ego and power to try to, again, divisively create this enemy that is anti-Christian, because that's a real trigger and that's a real knee-jerk to a lot of his followers, that they're trying to destroy us and they're trying to destroy our values. When you look at it, and they're destroying the values in their actions because of who they are. Anyway, here we are. It finds us crossing over into Canada for a few weeks to get a taste of what freedom and diversity and friendship and everything is like. Again, something that we have lost and forgotten since January, with years to go in this regime. Oh my God. 10 months. It seems like a lifetime. But anyway, we'll go there. We'll check it out for 3 weeks. We'll reevaluate, see what the plan is. If it's longer, if it's extended, if it's semi-permanent, I don't know. But here's where we're at. We'll update you more as we go.